Welcome to American National Government. In this course, you will discuss the purpose, structure, and evolution of United States government.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government Instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from American Government, Roots and Reform, American Government by Lenz and Holman, and our course-assigned OpenStax American Government textbook. This lecture focuses on markup, gatekeeping, and how a bill really moves. The core question is this: where does a bill really live or die when floor speeches get the cameras, but committees, calendars, and gatekeepers control the paperwork? The core competency is to outline the processes by which Congress develops, proposes, and enacts legislation. Where does a bill really live or die when floor speeches get the cameras, but committees, calendars, and gatekeepers control the paperwork? The fight moves through referral, markup, calendars, rules, holds, amendments, and leadership decisions that decide whether text ever reaches a final vote. The legislative process is often introduced through a diagram that looks like a polite board game. A member introduces a bill. A committee reviews it. The House and Senate vote. The president signs it. The chart is tidy, constitutional, and misleading. It describes the official route without explaining the gatekeepers who decide which proposals will move, which proposals will wait, which proposals will change shape, and which proposals will disappear without a clean recorded death. That missing story carries force because Congress does not govern by letting every idea rise or fall on a dramatic floor vote. Congress governs by filtering. Committee chairs choose whether to schedule hearings. Staff decide which drafts get serious attention. Subcommittees rewrite text line by line. Leadership decides whether floor time is worth the political cost. Senate procedure can turn support into delay. Conference negotiations can revive disputes that each chamber supposedly settled already. The Constitution names the chambers and the presidential veto. It does not identify the choke points where most legislative ambition suffocates. Markup is where a proposal stops being a slogan and becomes legal text. A bill can sound simple in a campaign speech and become expensive, complicated, or politically toxic once drafters identify definitions, exemptions, funding formulas, reporting duties, enforcement authority, and deadlines. That is why committee gatekeeping is so consequential. A chair does not need to denounce a bill to kill it. A chair can leave it unscheduled. Silence can be more powerful than argument because silence leaves no clean target for retaliation. The civic problem is not whether the process looks messy. It is whether this mess protects the country from rash lawmaking or protects incumbents and organized interests from accountability. If citizens do not understand markup, gatekeeping, and must-pass bargaining, they will confuse constitutional form with practical power. Article 1, Section 7 provides the outer skeleton. A bill must pass both chambers and go to the president. A veto can send it back. 2/3 of each chamber can override. That is the constitutional minimum. From the early republic forward, though, Congress developed internal procedures because 535 members cannot write coherent statutes through floor chaos alone. Committees emerged because specialization became unavoidable. Tariff law, defense procurement, tax policy, agriculture, banking, healthcare, surveillance authority, and immigration enforcement all require sustained attention, expert witnesses, staff work, and repeated revision. The chamber could not do all of that efficiently in one giant room. So Congress built smaller gatekeeping units, gave them jurisdiction, and turned them into the first serious checkpoint for most bills. This was not the only possible design. Congress could have relied more heavily on party leaders alone. It could have permitted far more open floor drafting. It could have centralized agenda control in ways closer to parliamentary systems. It did not. It built a fragmented structure where committee chairs, ranking members, subcommittee leaders, whips, parliamentary experts, and leadership all hold pieces of the process. Fragmentation creates expertise and bargaining space. It also creates more places where a proposal can die. The House and Senate develop different internal cultures around these gates. The House, with its size, uses more formal rules to structure debate and amendments. The Rules Committee often decides whether a bill will reach the floor under an open, closed, or modified rule. That decision affects whether opponents can force awkward votes, whether leadership can shield a coalition, and whether a bill can survive floor exposure. The Senate, by contrast, often permits looser floor amendment culture in theory while allowing individual members more leverage through unanimous consent bargaining, holds, and the threat of extended debate. Calendar control deepens the asymmetry. In the House, leaders and the Rules Committee can compress uncertainty by deciding when the chamber will consider a measure and under which amendment conditions. In the Senate, floor time is scarcer because each senator can slow movement through objection, negotiation over unanimous consent, or threats tied to other pending business. That means a bill can enjoy broad conceptual support and still miss its moment because leadership decides another deadline, nomination, or fiscal fight deserves the floor first. Must-pass legislation changes the whole equation. Congress can ignore many bills with little institutional damage. Congress cannot ignore appropriations deadlines, debt limit crises, defense authorization, disaster relief, or expiring authorities that keep major programs operating. Once a vehicle becomes must-pass, lawmakers load it with compromises, side deals, extensions, and technical corrections that might never survive as standalone bills. That is not an abuse of the process from the outside. It is one of the process's central operating habits. The Clean Civics version says each issue should stand on its own merits. The governing version says deadlines create leverage, and leverage attracts passengers. The modern gatekeeping structure hardened through repeated institutional reforms. The Legislative Reorganization Act of 1946 reduced committee sprawl, clarified jurisdictions, and expanded professional staffing so committees could handle a larger administrative state. The Legislative Reorganization Act of 1970 opened more hearings and markups to public view, strengthened subcommittees, and gave minority members more procedural footholds. Those changes did not eliminate gatekeeping. They made the gatekeeping machinery more formal, more staffed, and more visible, while leaving chairs, leaders, parliamentarians, and schedulers with decisive control over timing. Picture a committee chair with jurisdiction over a controversial bill. Advocacy groups want movement. Party activists want proof that promises produce action. The minority wants embarrassing votes or strategic delay. The chair has limited time, competing priorities, and a leadership team asking whether the bill helps or hurts the caucus. The easiest public myth says the chair simply believes or disbelieves in the bill. The harder truth is that the chair must calculate coalition math, floor time, stakeholder blowback, donor reaction, and the risk that opening the bill in markup will force amendments that fracture support. Markup itself is the real workshop. Members and staff revise definitions, add findings, strike sections, insert reporting duties, change funding language, and negotiate compliance timelines. A bill about environmental cleanup may turn on whether Congress writes shall or may, whether EPA or a state agency gets primary enforcement authority, or whether judicial review attaches at one stage or another. A bill about higher education may live or die on which institutions qualify, what counts as income, and when the Department of Education must issue rules. Public speeches rarely linger on these details because the details sound boring. The details decide who pays, who benefits, who administers, and who can sue. Committee chairs therefore hold negative power. They can schedule a hearing and invite momentum. They can delay and watch enthusiasm cool. They can circulate a chair's mark that rewrites the bill before ordinary members ever touch it. They can coordinate with party leaders and outside groups to test whether the proposal can survive the next gate. Members know this, which is why lobbying often targets committees before it targets the chamber floor. If a bill dies before markup, supporters never get the public showdown they wanted. Leadership steps in when stakes rise. A speaker or majority leader may bypass ordinary pathways, merge bills, or demand a rule that narrows amendment opportunities. In the Senate, the majority leader manages floor time under constant threat that one or several senators will insist on delay or extra bargaining. The minority does not need control to carry force. It only needs enough procedural tools or public leverage to raise the cost of proceeding. Must-pass vehicles intensify the pressure. Suppose appropriations are unfinished and shutdown risk rises. Members who could resist a controversial policy in standalone form may accept it inside a continuing resolution or omnibus because the alternative looks worse. That means Congress often does not pass pure bills. It passes bargaining packages constructed under deadline pressure. Citizens then see a giant spending measure and wonder why unrelated items appear inside it. The answer is simple and unsentimental. Congress uses urgency as a carrier. Article 1, Section 7 was written to settle the visible contest over who could make law. Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President. On the parchment, the fight is chamber against chamber and Congress against President. In the building, the first fight is over whether a proposal ever survives committee jurisdiction, markup, scheduling, and floor access long enough to reach that constitutional sentence. And the chamber rules and customs became tactical weapons because Congress needed ways to ration time and control exposure. A chair who refuses a hearing has not violated Article 1. A rules committee that sends a bill to the floor under a closed rule is not defying the Constitution. A Senate minority that forces cloture fights is using chamber procedure to raise the price of action. Those moves often shape outcomes more than the final vote because they determine which coalition fractures first and which amendments never receive daylight. The veto clause adds another layer. A president can reject a bill openly, and Congress can try to override. That confrontation is public and legible. Committee burial is the opposite. It often leaves little theatrical evidence. The Constitution makes the final gate visible. Congress makes the earlier gates decisive. The conference committee reveals another tension. If the House and Senate pass different versions, negotiators reconcile them into one text behind closed bargaining. That step sounds like cleanup. In practice, it becomes another site of lawmaking power because negotiators decide which chamber's language survives, which bargains can hold, and whether the final product still satisfies the coalitions that backed earlier versions. A member may vote for a House bill and later face a conference report that carries the same bill number, but a different political reality. Citizens should not treat this hidden structure as accidental clutter. It is the legislature's way of rationing time, expertise, and political risk. The hard judgment is whether those gates improve law by forcing revision or distort law by shielding power from public clarity. A system that lets chairs and leaders bury bills through silence can claim efficiency and caution. It can also hide responsibility so well that voters punish or reward the wrong people. Once the flowchart loses its authority, Congress starts making more sense. Bills die because someone with jurisdiction chooses inaction. Bills mutate because markup exposes costs and loopholes. Bills ride must-pass vehicles because deadlines create bargaining power. Senate delay persists because the chamber rewards members who can raise the price of unanimous movement. None of this makes lawmaking noble or corrupt by default. It makes lawmaking procedural, strategic, and difficult to judge without close attention. That difficulty sharpens democratic accountability. Citizens often ask why Congress does not vote on a popular idea. The honest answer may be that leadership never wanted members on record, the chair never scheduled the bill, the markup revealed division supporters could not survive, or the Senate lacked a viable path even if the House passed something first. In each case, the bill did not fail because the country decided. Named actors used institutional levers, must-pass law, changes moral rhetoric. Members who speak in absolute terms during campaigns often accept compromised text when shutdowns, expiring authorities, disaster timelines, or debt deadlines close in. That does not always prove hypocrisy. Sometimes it proves that governing under a deadline differs from messaging without one. At other times, it proves that Congress hides major policy decisions inside technical packages precisely because open standalone debate would expose political weakness. Both judgments can be true in the same chamber week. One final gate deserves attention. Score keeping. Budget offices, tax staff, and legislative counsel estimate fiscal effects, test compliance with chamber rules, and warn members when a proposal will trigger points of order or collide with reconciliation limits. A bill that sounds politically attractive can die once the official cost estimate appears or once counsel explains that the text invites litigation, conflicts with existing statute, or falls outside the committee's jurisdiction. The paperwork is not decoration after the political decision. The paperwork can reverse the political decision. The final question is therefore sharp. Should citizens want a Congress where more bills receive open floor votes, even if that produces sloppier drafting and more symbolic failure? Or should citizens accept a gatekeeper-heavy process on the ground that filtering, markup, and deadline bargaining are the only way to produce workable statutes in a large republic? If you want democratic clarity, you may dislike hidden gates. If you want technical law that can survive administration and litigation, you may need those gates more than you wish. The unresolved question is whether gatekeeping protects deliberation or lets a handful of officials bury public choices before accountability begins.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.